I'm happy to see so many people here. So we will be having here a Gender in Games Industry panel. And I'm super excited and delighted to have all these wonderful professionals here discussing about this subject, which is really important. And this will be a basically 2-hour panel in the sense that we will be discussing with the panel about 1 hour, and then in the end, for the last half an hour or so, will be time for questions and discussion with the audience. So I urge you to hold your tongue until then. And then I will be kind of giving you a microphone, and then you are very welcome to give your own ideas and thoughts about the subject. How does this sound for you? It's okay? Great. So we are having a bit hot here, as you can notice. So if anybody feels any discomfort or starts to feel fainting or something, I recommend warmly to go to grab some air outside in between. It's quite okay. So, but without further blabbering from my side, I will be giving short introductions of our panelists, and they will be continuing themselves, and they will have the stage. We have the honor and wonderful opportunity to have here both of our international RPG game designer guests of honor, Lynne Hardy and John Hodgson. And then we have 2 of Finnish professionals from the game industry, Anni Tolvanen and Juhana Pettersson. We were originally supposed to have here also talking Karolina Korppo, but she had to cancel, unfortunately, due to some illness in family. So I start here, just small introductions. Lynne is a game designer with an amazing track record spanning for almost 3 decades, despite of your young age.
Thank you.
And she's currently employed by in Chaosium and doing the Call of Cthulhu, right? Yeah. And I heard her wonderful presentation yesterday when she was talking about her career, and it was absolutely fascinating. So if she's got any time, well, you have to ask her if you didn't hear it yesterday. So then John here is a game designer and artist and a cartographer also, and his latest big thing is his own company called Handiwork Games. And it's also, well, I urge you to ask more of him also later on. And then we have Anni Tolvanen here, who is composer, Helsinki-based composer and sound designer, and she's created music and soundscapes for several international game projects and is currently working as the senior audio producer at the mobile game company Next Games. So Anni is giving us a really rare and interesting angle of sound design in games and about the things associated with gender and these kind of issues in that composing and sound area. And then, last but not the least, we have here Juhana Pettersson, accomplished RPG and LARP designer and author also. Well, all the Finns know Juhana here in Ropecon. Also because last year Juhana got the biggest award of Finnish RPG field, Golden Dragon, for all of his accomplishments in the field. So as you can see, we have this wonderful crew here to entertain and keep you interested during this panel. Maybe to say something about why I am here, you might wonder, like, who's this woman and what she's doing here? Well, I'm not professionally in game industry at all. I started RPG in the early 90s, and since then I've been doing it a lot as a hobby and loving it a lot and tried to combine it with my profession as an artist in somewhat, sometimes succeeding a bit better and sometimes failing very hard. But I got interested in the subject of gender in early 2000s, basically. And I started to design with my good friend Laura Kalli these LARPs where we tried to somehow ponder the idea of gender in games, in LARPs, and somehow to give female characters, for instance, more active roles, or even think about the idea why there should be strict binary female-male divisions at all between characters, and does it really matter if Robin Hood is male or female, and so on. So that's kind of my interest in this subject. But as I'm more interested in hearing what these professionals are saying about the subject, I will give them now the microphones. So, do you have microphones on? Yes. Right, great. Okay. So, could you please specify or give a little bit more background? What put you in this position where you are now? Like, what was your interest to the field in the first place? What got you interested in RPG, in gaming, game industry, and in particular, did you notice any gender-based? Did you have any thoughts about this when you started and so on? So could you, Lynne, tell a little bit about your...
Well, I got into gaming through the Seattle Seahawks, bizarrely, just because I was wearing a Seattle Seahawks top, and the gaming group at the university I was at were also American football fans, so that's how I got into gaming, totally by accident. I was aware of it, but didn't know anyone who did it. I'd spent my teenage years, I'd graduated from pony books when I was small to fantasy books, a lot of Anne McCaffrey and things like that. So it was something I was aware of and interested in, but didn't know how to get started, so that was wonderful. I got into the gaming industry because I was really oblivious and slightly arrogant, and thought, I've been reading these campaigns and scenarios other people are writing, I can do that. So I sent in some writing samples to Wizards of the Coast, and they thought I could do that too. And that kind of all went from there. I've always been a bit of a tomboy. I was always raised by my parents to, if I wanted to do something, there was no reason why I couldn't do it. So I think I've been oblivious for a very long time to gender stereotyping because, and I never thought it applied to me. I have been stereotyped in various careers. Teaching was by far the worst. Gaming, by far the least. Although, oddly, I'm starting to notice it more now, partly because I'm aware, but also partly because I am being subject to it in certain areas, which is really weird. That it's now, in some respects, for me, worse than it was when I first started.
Interesting. How about you, John?
So, I started gaming I was introduced to gaming by a neighbour who actually happened to be a young woman. And when I was about 9, she used to look after me, and she got me playing Talisman, of all things, probably because she needed to keep me occupied for enormous lengths of time. And she gave me a copy of the original, like the blue book, D&D books that I just did not understand at all. But it's sort of, you get that initial interest. I mean, same story as probably most of us here, gradually played more and more stuff. Industry-wise, I always wanted to be an artist. I was very interested in comics. I discovered the volume of work that one would have to produce as a comic artist seemed incredibly difficult. And I was role-playing already, so that seemed like a good path to go through. Cutting a long story short, I ended up in a position, of relevance to this panel, I ended up in a position at the company Cubicle 7 Entertainment, where I was in charge of hiring and managing creative people across all aspects of production. So it was part of my job there to keep an eye on who we were employing, how they were treated, that kind of thing. So that's probably of relevance. The new company that I'm running now, Handiwork Games, we're very small at the moment. We've only been running since January, so there's only maybe 7 of us all told. So that's a little bit early to talk too much about how that applies. I mean, I can talk about what we plan to do. But certainly my role at Cubicle 7 was one where I had some power, basically, within the industry as the creative director there. So yeah, and that's about it. I mean, obviously, I've been enjoyed tremendous privilege as a middle-aged white man, basically. So you know, I will be keen to hear other people's experiences, perhaps more than talk. So forgive me if I don't talk too much. But, yeah.
I was just saying to Johanna, you just have to bear with us now because you are kind of, you don't have to be afraid that you get stoned or rotten tomatoes, because we are keeping this very positive and relaxed panel, in my opinion. And anybody with tomatoes go outside right now. So no worries about that. So how about Anni? Tell me a little bit.
Yes, so I guess I was your average nerd kid, and then ended up hanging with all the geeks in junior high and high school, so a very traditional way of becoming a gamer in the 90s Nordics, I guess in all the Western world. I started LARPing and playing tabletop role-playing games, so those two were a big thing for me, especially LARPing in the late 90s and early 2000s. Then MMOs, that kind of stuff. After high school, I started studying music and to become a music teacher, which was, I already knew when I started studying, is that I really don't actually want to teach, but I didn't really know what else to do with that whole music and sound stuff that I was super interested in. And of course, I was a fan of games music. I really, somewhere in my mind, of course, composing for games was a dream, but it just never occurred to me that this would be a legit career option at all. And one of the biggest reasons for that was that even having studied music and composition and like musicology and psychoacoustics and all of these things in 3 different universities in Finland, all the people who I saw actually recording music and editing music and making sound effects and making sound design for films or games or so forth, they were all men, like 100% of them. I didn't know single one like female sound designer in my 20s. And of course, it would make a really good story if I would have just woken up one day and be like, fuck that, I am going to be the woman who will kind of conquer this field. But it was not so. It was just that in the end it was very practical. Like a friend basically asked me to help him record something because I clearly had a little bit better skills. So I helped with that little thing. And then I really wanted to record this song for a tabletop campaign we were playing. So I recorded that song. And then by those like small steps, I actually realized simply through doing that this is not actually some magical mystery field that you need and pardon my French, you need a penis to do these things. And then turns out that when you have been a geek and hang around geeks since you were like 13, by the time you are 30, and you've also done a lot of volunteer work on that field, by the time you are 30, your network can be pretty amazing. So then I was in a very privileged position that when I actually wanted to start working for games audio professionally, I basically knew all the right people. And now here I am. But that's kind of my angle to games industry and gender from professional, like personal, professional point of view.
Interesting. Johanna, how about you?
So, I remember the first time I made a kind of like a conscious policy decision regarding role-playing games and gender. And that was in high school, because I'd started role-playing with the D&D with a bunch of other boys at elementary school, quite young. And but then I grew older. I switched schools to one kind of a super hippie arts-based high school with the values that implies. And I was sort of in that environment. And also I was 16. I wanted to engage with women in my social life. And the game that was very fashionable at that time at the school was Vampire the Masquerade. And I was presented with the amazing concept that also a lot of women were very interested in this game. And when I put together a new game that I run, I thought, okay, now we'll stop with this like man cave stuff. Now let's make a game with like male players and female players, and it's going to be great. And it was great. It was the best. It was wonderful. And it kind of, for me, I remember at that time I was thinking that, this is how you get like good role playing. Like I'm having more fun now that it's like this. Now that we are out of the man cave. And I do believe that lesson has stuck with me since then. It was a good thing to learn at 16. In Finland, the kind of LARP and tabletop game industry is so small that it feels weird to me to call it an industry. But for me, I published my first book at 2005, and then a bunch of other stuff, made a bunch of LARPs through the years. But 2016 was when I quit my job in television to go into the more exciting world of professional LARP making and writing role-playing game books. Perhaps unusual career choice, but that's what I did. So far, I worked a lot with stuff related to Vampire the Masquerade. For White Wolf, we made with a company called Participation Design Agency in Sweden. We made the 3 licensed LARPs called End of the Line, Enlightenment in Blood, and Parliament of Shadows played in Helsinki, Brussels, Berlin, and New Orleans. And those have been very, very good experiences. And then also, I think sort of industry-wise, highest profile stuff I did was work on Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, where I was the lead writer for the Anarch book. And that has been an interesting experience in many ways. But what else? Yeah, also a little bit of video game work in Finland. And I think that all of those, I don't think I have the quite same kind of industry background as everybody else on this panel, in fact, but I have some thoughts.
Wonderful. I sent you a little email, like before this panel, where I suggested that you could maybe think about this subject from 3 different angles. And the angles I kind of suggested were the professional angle, in the sense that how do you think that the gender and equality and such matters appear on your own respective fields, basically? Are the genders, for instance, equally present on your fields? Well, Anni's case already came out that at least in the 2000s that wasn't the case. I don't know now, Anni may tell herself. Is there something, has there happened something? How about the minority genders? How about transgender people? All this, like, is the salary the same for everybody, or are there differences between genders still, gaps in salary or that? Then I was thinking the angle of the audience-wise, how the gender and equality and such is present in the context of the audiences. Are there equal amount of male and female assumed players or other genders represented in the people you are doing your stuff to, basically? So does this somehow kind of appear, or does it has to do something with what you are doing, basically? Does it affect what you are creating? And then the content-wise, being the third angle, is the content somehow created bearing in mind the genders, or how the genders are represented in the content? Like when thinking about for instance, John, the old fantasy illustrations, where normally the females are represented with really big busts, and then there is this barbarian carrying them to safety, or something like that. So this has maybe changed somewhat during the years, or has it? So these were kind of the angles I was offering you. So if going to this professional side, like how do you feel it appears on your field? What would you say, Lynne? You were yesterday when you were talking about your career. somebody asked you, do you have any idols or people who you kind of would name to be your inspirations? And you named a lot wonderful people, but I noticed that all of these were men.
And
so,
I can now correct that.
Okay.
Egregious mistake. Naughty place. There are a lot of women in the industry I admire tremendously because they have forged paths for us. There are a lot of trans women in the industry I admire tremendously because they are forging paths for everyone. So we have Kat Tobin, who is one of the co-owners of Pelgrane Press, who is a wonderful woman who has done so much for gaming. We have Nicole Lindros, who I know has been here at Green Ronin, one of the co-owners there, who has done a lot of advocacy. There are people like Crystal Fraser, who is doing wonderful things. There are some non-binary people that I know as well. So Donna Pryor, who organises Ropecon in Seattle, they're trying to create a welcome, open, friendly space for all genders to come and enjoy gaming, and orientations as well. So there are an awful lot of other genders out there that I admire tremendously because of the work that they are doing to make sure that women and everyone else can come to the table and enjoy.
Right, exactly, yeah. How would you say, during your career, have you noticed any change in this? I mean, when you talked about your early career, it seemed that you were quite alone being a female in your workplace, or
tabletop, yes, but not in LARPing particularly. There always were more women in LARPing in Britain than there were in tabletop, or obviously more women. It's not that there weren't women in tabletop; they were just less visible, particularly at conventions.
Right. Okay.
And this was an interesting thing. I was having a chat to Kat about this when you sent me your email. Right. And we were saying it is a visibility thing. It's not that women aren't out there, but they're not always afforded the same opportunities that male writers are.
Right.
Partly through self-selection, because they, oh no, I can't. Partly because people haven't gone out and sought them, which we really have to do with minority groups, because they do self-select against themselves, because they don't see themselves, so they think, oh, maybe I shouldn't. So it is something we have to actively work towards.
That's true, yeah. Yeah, that's kind of an angle I was talking with Juhana earlier, actually. This kind of how to get minorities present themselves more. You had some ideas about this, or you were talking something about it in LARP circles, and how you kind of, when you credit people in your games, what's your solution for this kind of a...
Yeah, so my experience is kind of with this Nordic LARP scene, and what kind of people who makes LARPs and who can do those things. I think since a lot of this is kind of springs from the community, and it's the professional part of it is not the biggest part at all. Like most of it is very, very hobby based. So that means that kind of LARPs are made by the people who just make them. And I think especially in Finland, but in my experience, also in the other Nordic countries, both the player base and the base of people who make LARPs is very kind of equal, in the sense that there's like 50-50 men and women. In Finland especially, like when I was growing up and I was looking at like who makes LARPs, there was to me it felt like mostly women make LARPs was my sort of image of it. But there's a but. I don't think, I'm not sure if it's related to money, and it's very hard to say anything about the money side of it because the money is so small. It's like can you make a statistical analysis of like 5 people? I don't know. But there is one part where I do think that it's not equal, and that's a question of credit and kind of fame that you get. And I think in that sense, it's in the Nordic LARP scene. If you think about like who sort of is the face of a thing, or gets to do all of those things, then I think that is unequal. And I think there's an example of there's some specific examples which I often think about when you present something organized by a collective of people. What happens is that gets credited to the famous guy who's in that group. I was like, personally, like, yeah, this guy did it. And that's very bad, because it's not true at all. And that's why what Katri referred to is that I felt that I have to start crediting, like, very individually, like, this is what people did, so that you can see that this person did something important, that person did something important, and that gives, like, an honest image of what's happening, and brings up people.
That's a good idea. Yeah, Anne, you had something to.
Yeah, I wanted to share a bit of a similar anecdote or like reflection on this kind of self-selection and the problems with the credit. Before I started at my current job, I ran a year this game startup incubator for the city of Helsinki as this project where we had like young games professionals, as in graduating from games programs from schools, starting their kind of small companies, game teams, and getting mentoring for getting their first or second or whatever game shipped professionally. And the one thing I noticed that, well, obviously the teams kind of unfortunately were maybe 70–80% male, but every time that those teams had to like present their work, even if it was just like in-house gathering of the teams, it was always the dudes who stood up and started talking. The women, like, to the extent where there was like, please the whole team just now tell what you've been up to, the guys stood up and walked to the front of the room, and the women just sat there. They didn't do anything. And we're talking about like young people in their like early 20s. So it's not even like, even if some of these things are changing, there's still these learned behavioral patterns where clearly we need to do more active work to. And I mean that those girls, like not girls, women, they stopped doing that after I made it visible, and then it became kind of a gag. But it was awkward. It was awkward in the beginning. The women also, like, you could see that they felt kind of awkward standing in front of people and talking about stuff that they'd done. And it was psychologically and emotionally a super weird dynamics to witness.
Interesting.
So yeah, it needs work, and I think it's a matter of giving credit and also sometimes making those women stand in the front of the room and tell a bunch of people what they've done.
Yeah.
Lynne.
And that was the point I forgot to make, was the fact that if you look at mainstream gaming, the establishment, if you like, which I belong to largely, and indie gaming, there's a huge difference. There are an awful lot of senior women designers in the indie gaming field, not so much in the mainstream. And again, we need to start bringing that over and encouraging that, so that there is more parity in that respect, so that we are visible, so that people can see that this is something that they're welcome to do and should be doing.
That's true, yeah. How about John? You have been quiet. As you said, you will, but I don't want it. I want your contribution.
I was thinking while I was listening, actually, that there is great virtue, actually, in men in the industry modelling some behaviour like listening. Do you know what I mean? Because there is a pressure, I think, perhaps, I'm going to do a what about the men style thing. No, but there is a pressure on men to be forthright, you know, and they gain sort of, you know, social credit by being more aggressive, if you like. Something, actually it was Kat that you mentioned, had mentioned to me. I don't know the precise figures, but there was a study done on conversation and gender roles within conversation. And men apparently will generally, if a woman speaks in a conversation, men are very bad at identifying the percentage of time taken up in the conversation by a woman and by men. And they will always underestimate how much they have spoken and overestimate how much women have spoken. And that was really interesting to hear, because you go, you could, I mean, I can instantly go, oh, I bet I do that. You know, without a shadow of a doubt, I go, I bet I do that. I bet I think, because you know, and again, it's like that waiting to speak thing and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think there's a lot to learn, you know, and there's a lot to, and it would be nice to make it okay for men to just listen, you know. I mean, I don't want to just dodge participation entirely, but it's just like that.
Admit it, you're just kind of hangovers, and that's why you're.
And once conversation becomes almost like a cut and thrust thing, it's very easy to start modelling more aggressive behaviour, and it's interesting to try and change that. It's an interesting challenge.
That's good. Yeah.
Shut up, you know. Like.
But I would be interested to hear in your field, basically. I mean, the field of art and illustration. Are there women and men like equally represented, like the famous illustrators of the RPG book art, for instance?
It breaks down in a few different ways. There have been really, really well thought of women illustrators for a very long time, but maybe not in such great numbers as men. I would definitely say that was true. Interestingly, in terms of management positions, when I first kind of became a full-time illustrator, the head of art at, say, Fantasy Flight Games was a woman. The head of art at Paizo was and still is a woman. Wizards of the Coast has really good, gender parity. I mean, all of the art directors at Wizards of the Coast at one point on D&D were women, which was very interesting because you didn't hear about it. There was a lot of, I think even from people that were perhaps making complaints about gender representation in the artwork were not aware that the people running that on D&D were women. And I wonder what, I mean, I can't possibly speak for how they were making decisions. I assume they probably were not in control of many of the decisions. But there has been a strong number of women in perhaps art direction. Artist-wise, I've often encountered the problem that there are women that do well tend to become, if they survive in the industry as freelance illustrators, they become too expensive often for me to hire because they're so good to have survived that they then, like I wasn't able to hire them because they were too expensive and good for them. But there aren't the numbers, the sort of pool you're drawing from is of different numbers. I am seeing that changing though, very much so, I would say, even in the last 5 years.
You said yesterday when we were talking a little bit at the terrace that you found it at some point difficult that if you want to have some niche of a illustration and then you have like 100 men and then 10 females.
Absolutely the case on, say for example, on Tolkien games, the way we did the art direction on the first edition of the One Ring was all very much based on sort of historical issues and kind of Beowulf and Anglo-Saxon things. When you have like a pool of 100 up-and-coming illustrators that you can afford, and maybe there are only 10 women illustrators, if you then put in the caveat that they also need to know something about Anglo-Saxon history, suddenly you have almost nobody to choose from who are women. That is changing, I'm really glad to say, I think, and that's about, the pool needs to just be made bigger and bigger and bigger so that is not an issue.
Right, yeah. Anni?
About that pool of professionals and why in certain fields there's often there's just not, you don't have those options, right? If you want to hire a sound designer professional for a games company, your options for women are almost non-existent. But I think there's an interesting dynamics that I recently addressed in this very interesting online conversation was about how much slack individuals are given when they are still learning the ropes. And I think there is a very kind of big gendered problem where we have like a cultural concept of this slightly clueless dude bro that has just graduated and is working their first job and is basically fucking everything up and thinks that their skill level is up here when it's actually like somewhere on this table. And people look at them and be like, oh, that's so cute, he will grow up, like he will snap out of it in 3 years, and if he doesn't, then, well, then, whatever, then he just don't progress. But if you have a woman in that same position, behaving like that, being clueless, they will be just kicked out after their internship, and they are not given the same chance to be clueless. So in a way, what you noted about knowing some professionals who are women whose skill level is like so high that they are unhireable because they are too expensive. They are also in that position because they had to get that good to even survive in the industry. So when we're talking about the kind of the bulk average skilled tier of people, for anybody to get to that tier, you have to be able to fuck up a bunch of times to get there. And I think the big challenge the industry is that women are not given that slack to even get to that tier where you can then kind of start building your career upwards.
So you said that it's I mean, so it seems that in the sound industry or composer side, there hasn't been that much change from the beginning of your career, as you are saying that it's almost, I mean, that it's very few female sound designers or composers still in the industry. So you are working in a very small group of.
Yes, like I mean, I don't know if there's any official numbers. Just a while back I found this organization called soundgirls.org. I didn't like the girls bit, but I kind of understand why they went with that, which is kind of the international network of women working as sound engineers and in sound design and in the kind of the producer side of sound. And their research, which I don't know what it's founded on, but at least their research says that between music industry, films, games, all of like sound engineering, sound designing, it's still 95% male.
That's quite a big number, though. Yeah, but I mean,
and it sounds believable to me personally.
Yeah. I've noticed the same. I mean, I'm writing my PhD for the film department for Aalto University, and it's funny how it still seems that in the certain like inside the film department, there are these different paths you can take, and sound design being one of them. And basically, all of the sound designers or sound design MA students I've encountered are male and not female for some reason. And I was, funnily enough, the first time I was applying to it was then, back then it was University of Art and Design, and I was applying there like right from the high school. I thought that maybe being a photographer for films would be interesting. I mean, filming the movies. So I applied for the film departments, like the film path. And I got the information that they don't really take girls in because the girls are not capable of carrying the equipment because it's so heavy. And I was like, well, that doesn't sound very plausible. I was at the time, I was kind of, as I'm still kind of not the smallest of the girls, so I didn't kind of, so probably there was something to do with the technical side, and girls were supposed to use the technical, I mean, the cameras were a bit too difficult to use. But that was the time when the film department was led by this really conservative old guy who later on got kicked out because of the sexual harassment and all that. So it was kind of it was seen in the place back then. But still, there is quite a big difference in the numbers I've noticed in some of the areas. You are supposed to learn inside the film industry. For instance, in the documentary side of films, there are lots of women like directing documentary films, but then in the fiction film sides, for some reason, much less. So it's kind of interesting to notice these things. Johanna?
Yeah, if we look at how the gender lines break down between Finnish LARP and Finnish tabletop role-playing game designers, they go very differently. In LARP, we are in this internationally very, if compared internationally, very utopian state. Yay us. In tabletop role-playing games, we are really not. and like I think at this point, what we have in Finland, we have 3 women who have published anything in the tabletop role-playing game field, and quite a lot more than 3 men who have done so. So it's like, I don't know, 98% and 2% or something like that. And obviously that's an atrocious state of affairs.
Yeah, that's kind of a big difference when thinking about how much in Finland anyway women play tabletop role-playing games. Why is it so that they are not inclined in writing and publishing them? That's kind of its own discussion we should be having. But how about the audience-wise? if you think about the audience, it was like here the RPGs, LARPs, a lot played by women also. How about in UK, Lynne?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I am seeing more visible women taking part in tabletop. Certainly when you go to gaming conventions, you see more women there, and they're not just there as cosplayers.
Right, yeah.
And like I said, I've always been very lucky to be surrounded by a lot of very strong women writing LARPs that I've taken part in. We are seeing more, which is good. As I've mentioned on a couple of panels, the biggest demographic for Call of Cthulhu is Japanese women by a long, long way, which is wonderful. So it's interesting that there are areas in gaming where our stereotypical ideas of who's playing are completely incorrect because we have a very narrow field of our own experience. But there's still a lot more that can be done. And there are certain organisations that are trying to make it more comfortable for women to come and other minority genders to come to the table and feel safe, because there is a perception of a lack of safety in certain circumstances, and if you don't feel safe at a table, then you're not going to take part in a game, because you are, as coming to a convention, taking part in a game with strangers, you are putting a lot of trust in those people. And that's a difficult thing to do. It's a brave thing to do. And we need to make sure that the situation and the circumstances are there, that people do feel able to give us their trust, and we repay that.
Right, yeah. How about other genders or transgendered people, or have you, what kind of...
quite a lot of transgender people working for Chaosium, which is wonderful.
Right.
And there are a lot of transgender gamers out there.
Right.
And obviously because people are becoming more accepting and more aware, people now feel confident and safe to be themselves, their true gender. And that's a wonderful thing. And I think that we can be ahead of the field in encouraging people to be themselves
exactly.
and come and game with us.
Yeah. Cthulhu eats everybody.
Yeah, in the end.
Kind of very equally. It doesn't matter if you're male or female. Yeah. How about John? Have you... what kind of...
I mean, I think, again, this is changing sort of UK and US wise. I think due to some changes in the way the broader subject matter is handled. So, for example, I used to work on the Doctor Who role-playing game, which was hugely popular with women. And I just think it helped. I think it was an offering that was an easy route in, if you like. Now, easy route in is an interesting thing to say. I've been thinking a lot lately, it's come up in a lot of conversations about in-groups and out-groups. And I think so many things come down to this. And when a member of an out-group is perceived to make the decision to try and cross into the in-group. So the in-group in role-playing games, say, would be stereotypically a bunch of men making role-playing games. If a woman makes the choice to try and join that group, I think they open themselves up to criticism if you're not very careful, and it's like, oh, well, you've chosen to do this, so suck it up, right? Which is it's absolutely ridiculous, because you haven't chosen to sort of cross a boundary, because you don't. Where is the boundary almost for the person moving between groups? But this was something we were talking a lot about this morning, about a whole bunch of issues and societal issues about in-groups and out-groups and change and where people perceive boundaries are and how they react around those. But yeah, I am seeing change. UK, really good at UK Games Expo this year. There was a hugely diverse audience.
Right.
I had a couple of moments where I was really, really proud to just go, wow, like look at this. Because I remember the previous largest event would have been UK Gen Con, which hasn't run for years. And that was always incredibly male-dominated and a little bit... No criticism of UK Gen Con, that was the name on the biggest event.
Right.
And that used to be a little bit depressing when I would guest there, and you'd be like, oh, is this our audience, right? Is this who we play to? That doesn't reflect my life, if you like, or who I would like to be talking to with our work, and it's really changed, I think. It's broadening out, certainly in the UK, and I think in the US as well. I've not been to a US show for maybe 2 years now, so I don't know this year how it is. But I've seen that change over the 5 or 6 years I was going. I saw changes there. I mean, again, as everyone is saying, more to do, I think. But it is changing.
Yeah. For some reason, I've always seen Ropecon quite equal, or in many ways, as a this kind of as a convention. Because I was here, well, 1994. It was the first Ropecon, was it, in Paasitorni? And I was there dressed up like a ranger called Robina, something like that. Because I as I told Lynne earlier, I fell in love with Robin Hood. So all of my characters in RPG were basically some kind of rangers with different ways of saying Robin or Robina. But I mean, it was already then I felt like home in many ways. And even afterwards, and after the Me Too campaign was really big wake-up call for the RPG circles in Finland also, and for the LARP circles. And we noticed many things we have to address to. And there were severe cases even. But still, like in the general idea, always, every time I come to Ropecon, I see all this diversity of players, and it makes me really happy, because it feels that I can come here and look and be whatever I want and however I want, and nobody judges. And that's something which is really, really valuable and kind of rare, in my opinion, also. So I like to keep it this way. I really hope that it will continue. And I think I don't have any doubt that it will. How about Anni? About the idea of audience-wise, because I think that male and female and other genders, they play games and they see movies. But are there some differences between? Have you noticed audience-wise any differences between genres or this kind of?
I think that what I personally noticed is not that important for games industry, and especially for mobile games industry, because it's all free to play, which means that understanding who plays these games and why they play them is super important, because they are not going to give you any money if you don't understand these questions. So there's plenty of research out there through which we actually know that in general, mobile games, especially casual mobile games, the majority of players are women worldwide. But it's interesting that still for mobile games, because they are produced by male-dominated companies and male-dominated, and not dominated as in oppression-dominated necessarily, but just as like percentage-wise, a lot of design decisions are still made through this very male lens. For example, one game I was working on a while back, one of the first character models or like body types that was implemented into the build was this very Asian school girl type with this tiniest bikini. And there was like no real reason for that. It was the genre was this steampunkish something. So theoretically, it's a completely legit that, this model is part of the aesthetics of this genre. But it's still, from being a woman myself, like looking at the prototype product where we have maybe 4 character models represented, and if 2 of them are very kind of hero type male, something with full body armors and such, and then you have like one sort of gender neutral character, and then you have this bikini model. That is already tells something about the mindset of the design team. And I'm again absolutely certain that nobody was thinking that let's do this super sexist thing with this prototype. But again, it tells a lot about the defaults that we carry with us and that will go into the work that we do. And that is why questioning these kind of choices and thinking about, again, like the audience and what is the audience supposed to see. So working with the product, being a designer, a female designer looking at that and going like, whoa, I don't want to play like that. That's not a character choice I want to make.
That was based on this
it was
kind of
already alienating.
Yeah. I think it was based on this kind of character type that I mean, or this kind of a belief which was very kind of widely believed that bikinis actually are really great armor. When thinking about back there how females were armored in early Dungeons and Dragons editions.
Bizarrely, as a comedy addendum to that, in the treasure trap system, female barbarians got more armour the less they wore because the guys were too distracted to hit them.
Right, exactly, yeah, and that's quite a good reason to give them just a small bikinis. Yeah, that's true. How about you, Hannah, audience-wise, your ideas?
Yeah, like we make stuff for people, so obviously it's important to consider the audience of like who we make it for, and that's been one of the interesting things about working with specifically Vampire, which is the first time I worked with like an IP that's like has an audience, built-in audience, and all of these expectations and things that come with it. Is an interesting thing that that it's suddenly much more complicated and kind of rich as compared to, for example, weird little art games that I did before. So that has been an interesting experience. There has been some little gender-related heartbreak there also. Like we made the LARP End of the Line, a nightclub vampire LARP, and it was first run in Helsinki. And it's the last LARP I made that has like gendered characters. Now after that everything I made was unisex, and you will learn why in the story, because I designed the characters sort of for this Finnish context. So I have a few kind of like non-gendered characters to allow for versatility, but most are male or female, and that works great in Finland. And then we take it to New Orleans, and it turns out that in the New Orleans vampire player base is not 50-50 along the gender line. It's actually more like 25-75. And then I had the experience of like remaking all those female characters into male characters, and somehow I found that to be like super painful. I don't want to do this. This sucks. I hated it, and that was kind of a sad experience. With Vampire, one of the things I did, like, because when you work with a setting, of course you want to be kind of faithful to it, but also I think everybody who does it, you have your own little ideas fermenting in the brain. And what I did was that when we're making new characters into this world, I just went through like canon characters for Vampire, like what kind of characters exists. And I did notice that, for example, most of the princes of the cities who rule vampire cities are men. And I thought, I don't really like see why that is. And I thought that since I'm making the Anarch book here, that's like what I'm doing, that's my job, so I'll just make like, I think almost every single new character I created was a woman, just to like even it up a bit. And there was also like, I thought that it's very useful to, when doing that kind of like thing, like who am I listening to? And I thought Vampire has a lot of women players, so maybe it makes sense for me to like use my ear and my eye on the screen to see what they want, what are they doing, what kind of things. And very helpfully, often they write articles where they explain very clearly what they want, so I can just sort of read those and be enlightened. And one thing that I've gotten good feedback for is that there's this strong female character, or this kind of like a typical in many new superhero comics, who is like a good person, takes care of their family, is very dependable and relatable and good. And I thought that, okay, that has been done many times. So then for Vampire I created a character who basically just loves killing rich people because murder is great, has no redeeming qualities at all, except that I've wrote in there that she always likes to punch up, usually physically, just like people. And then if you follow her philosophy, it's easier for you to, as in Vampire, diablerize people who are stronger than you, and without being punished for it. And people like that because that's enough because that's not the kind of character who exists, and it's important that there is no judgment on this. Obviously, this is not a good person character, but this is fiction, where we play with fictional things, so we can create fictional monsters, and sometimes we can live through them instead of judging them.
That's quite true, yeah. Interesting. So we've covered something about your fields, when it comes to your professional career, experiences on that one, and also the audience. But how about the content? Thinking about gender and gender representation in the content, what you are actually writing. As Johanna already told, this was one of the good kind of ideas to change or somehow make new ideas of that. I noticed when I was starting to write LARPs in the early 2000s that even though, as Johanna said earlier, many writers who wrote LARPs and many directors were females, actually in the games, funnily enough, the active characters or the characters of action were actually very often male characters. So females were more kind of reserved these supporting character roles. So it was so evident that sometimes that we ended up calling the female characters in LARPs the fishermen's wives, which has to kind of stay at home around they are knitting nets and something like that, and the men are the ones who are going on adventures and actually doing the fishing, and we are just kind of stayed there. So I was in many of those kinds of LARPs myself, and I got so tired knitting the nets that then I wanted to change it in my games later on with Laura Kalli, who was the one, the other director of the LARPs, and we were writing these kind of characters. We decided to be so equal that it was almost ridiculous. So if we had 4 pirate captains, 2 of them were women and 2 of them were men, and then there were kind of ungendered or transgendered characters within the group and all that. And if we had 2 archaeologists, one of them was female and one of them was, and so we wanted to be like very equal in that sense. I don't know if that worked, how well that worked or something, but at least we got to try out these things, and also to notice that okay, it doesn't matter. We had the idea that Robin Hood actually was female, but it was just she was changed in the history writing to be a male character because it was kind of those times, you know. So how have you reacted in your content in this kind of a gendered base?
Well, I've said this a few times this weekend, is the fact that a lot of the games I've worked on are set in the real world. People deserve to see themselves in the games, so we need to make sure that is happening. When we updated masks, as I said last night, for those of you here, there are about 100 odd characters in that book, NPCs. 13 of them were women, 9 or 10 were there purely to act as sacrificial victims. That was literally all they did. They turned up, they got slaughtered to a god. And no, that's not happening. Not anymore. They're going to turn up, they're going to be people. They're not just going to be there as pretty sacrificial victims, they're going to have things to do. We didn't quite make it to parity, but we did include a lot more women characters. The women characters that we included actually got to do things. They had their own agendas. They might occasionally work with the characters, the investigators. They might occasionally work against them. They weren't just there as walk on, die, get carried off. So that was something. It was interesting what you were saying about writing genderless LARP characters, because I'm pushing now that when we include pre-gens in books, they're genderless, so that the players get to choose what gender their characters are. And I think that's very important, again, for representation. You should have control over, even pre-gens, you should have some say in who they are and how they appear and how you represent them in a game. Sometimes it's a little bit more difficult. In certain historical eras, in certain occupations, it would be a little bit more difficult, but then I am putting in, if you want this person to be transgender, then they're transgender. Because we know there are historical examples of transgender men in the army, in the navy, pirates. So why not? Why not in games too?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, more women,
Yeah.
more genderless characters, gender fluid characters, trans characters, because they've always been in the world, so let's start seeing them in games.
Right. Very good. Yeah. How about John?
Yeah, I think just following on from what you were saying there, Lynne, I was just remembering we did 2 years running at Gen Con, we did some really enjoyable panels about the representation of gender in fantasy art. And it was myself, Nicole Lindrews from Green Ronin, and Chris not Chris Pramus, that's Nicole's husband. Rich Thomas, how can I forget poor Rich? Hope he's not watching, he'll be really upset. Rich Thomas from Onyx Path. And we had some really, really fantastic discussions. And at one point, I made a guy walk out because he was asking, in historical settings, how do you make them non-sexist? Because we all know all these terrible things happen to women constantly. You know, he was talking about early medieval period, the Dark Ages. And I said, and I was trying to put the point, perhaps I put it too forcefully, that why do you think that? You know, that's a sort of, I'm not saying nothing bad happened to people in the early medieval period, clearly not. But the assumption that, oh, women are treated this way throughout history, the end, so therefore we can't put them in games because they'll only be there to be, you know, molested or kidnapped. Or, and you know, well, if you're playing a role-playing game where you are an exceptional character or someone that could become an exceptional character, there's no shortage of examples through every period of history of people of all genders who were exceptional characters, and we must assume there are enormous amounts of people who have not been recorded to history. I just don't find it a difficult leap, whereas this gentleman obviously did find it an impossible leap, thought I was being ridiculous, and he stormed out. And it's very difficult to not just go, bye. You know, and you
should
have
have
to
kind of
yourself,
medals for everybody who
I
stormed
think
out for that kind of reasons.
I was going to look it up on my phone, and I won't because that'd be rude to get my phone out. A friend of mine, an editor I used to work with, sent me a brilliant quote about mercenaries in, I think, the 14th or 15th century in a manuscript recording. They just didn't bother recording gender, and it turned out there were loads of women in the role that were just never recorded because gender was not recorded. Then later, people reading those documents assumed it was all men. And again, I'm not, you know, I don't want to be foolish about it and suggest there has always been gender parity in all roles across history. That would be nonsense. But it's more complicated, I think, and people, it's too easy to just go, oh, well, this is how it is. You know, not necessarily. And also, I think it's very important to make strong decisions. Like when we were working on the Tolkien games, we know there are very few women characters in Tolkien's work for a variety of reasons. But you just make the decision to go, no, we're not doing it that way because this is, you know, 2019, what have you, and you include a greater diversity of characters, and you look really hard to make sure, you know, you gather enough stuff to make it credible from the source, you know, and you just change it, and that's how it is. So yeah.
How about you, Anne?
So I think I'm going to dive into some audio geekery for a minute here because I hadn't gotten the chance yet. Like from a more immediate perspective, audio is obviously kind of gender neutral. Men and women who have the kind of the normal range of adult hearing hear things like physically in a very similar manner. But but as we know from the field of psychoacoustics, which is the field of science that researches how people react to different kind of sound environments and why, I think there's a lot of interesting potential looking into gendered experiences of environment through sound. And I don't have a lot of good examples of this having been used. I came up with one, but basically what I'm talking about is that, for example, in feminist discourse, many might have heard about this concept of like pelon maantiede, as in like the geography of fear, as in many women grow up reading their environment constantly for potential signals of danger. And one of the most important senses we use to evaluate that is hearing. Even if we don't realize that actively, we still all the time our brain is tracking all the audio cues around us. It's just that we are kind of ignoring the ones that we don't find relevant. And in games audio, these kind of subtle cues, audio cues, are used all the time to make the game world real to players, be it digital games or analog games, as in like LARPs or whatever, because it's a completely different thing. Even in a LARP, if you have a massive fusion reactor inside a spaceship, a completely made-up example, and if you go and push a button, and then you're supposed to pretend that the engine does something, it's going to be a completely different experience if there's this massive sound cue of like bass heavy subwoofer physically like kind of pumping your body. And what I've been thinking personally about is how men and women do react to different sound cues in slightly different manners. Of course, these are highly, highly personal experiences as well. But I recently played this video game, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. Some might have played that too. It's one of the rare games where they put really top-notch production values on the audio design, and they actually recorded everything as this binaural audio that when you listen to it with headphones, you have this constant, really freaky soundscape, ghosts whispering in your ears, and the whole environment coming to life in a really uncanny manner. And in that game, as per design, that soundscape is supposed to represent of mental illness of a young woman. And I think that they have really nailed it, really, that audio part, like without that audio, the game is just like you have this young female protagonist that runs around in this undead world and kills monsters. But when you do like listen, like play that game with headphones, enjoying the audio like it's designed, it's a completely different game experience, which definitely touches this geography of fear and feeling helpless as a small, physically small woman being attacked by these monsters. And I think it's a super interesting example of a game where audio sign and psychoacoustics was used in a way to bring this very deeply gendered, but at the same time extremely human and relatable experience due to like wider audiences.
Sounds super interesting. How about you, Hannah? Did you have some ideas on the content side?
Yeah, one of the things that I love about role-playing games and LARP is that the audience connection is so immediate and strong. Like I was running a tabletop game, and I was in the habit of sort of giving incidental NPC characters for just the players to play, so that there's more interaction between players in those kinds of scenes. And one of the players was like a middle-aged stay-at-home mother, one of my players, and the character I gave her was this 20-year-old confident young buck, this young guy who's good-looking and knows it. And she went to town with it. She was like hitting on every woman in sight, like super with like this manic energy. And I was looking like, wow, like that's amazing. And I think that we can make a kind of a political analysis why that is fun for that kind of a player. But I'm not really interested in that. What I'm interested in is like what role-playing games make possible. A LARP makes possible is for people to have these new experiences, to do new things, to be new people. And who do we make those? Like, who are the people we want to help have those experiences? And to me, it's a political and moral question. I think about that a lot. But I often found that I personally get the best results when I just think about it as very like a creative, practical question. Like, okay, I saw in a LARP or I saw in a tabletop game that this woman had a great time, or this trans person had a great time with this that I didn't expect. Why was that, and how do we replicate it? And since a lot of the stuff I've worked on is like I think many people do things like I don't know, that inspire people or give them something to look up to. This is not really my thing, but I do this like fucked up shorted crap where people are like covered in blood and dry hump. So the thing is that for me it's less about like how to make these beautiful ideas and more about how do we take these real people, these actual players, these actual women, these actual trans people, and how do we get them in to have these all of these fun fucked up experiences that we play these or make this game for. The we might be just me here, but still, still that's the sort of angle I used to go into it.
That would have been really good closing statement for this panel, but because you're a hetero cis white male, I don't give it to you. But but I will get the kind of closing statements from Lynne and John and Anni. Do you have something to say before we give the microphone to the audience on this subject, on this matter?
Now, one of the things you mentioned in the email was about pay, which doesn't get talked about a lot because we're all too polite. And we're raised not to talk about money because money, like politics, is a contentious subject. Now, most of the people that I spoke to say that they either pay flat rate or they pay based on experience. But one of the interesting things that came out of that is based on the men get more opportunities than women and other minority genders. Visibility again. So yes, if you get noticed, you're going to get the same pay, but that's that step, that getting noticed step, getting the opportunity, being allowed to make mistakes, you know, not being held to a higher degree of account than your male counterparts. So yeah, we're heading in the right direction, but there's a lot more work to do.
Right. How about John?
I'm not very clever at sort of closing statement things.
You'll get more slack with them.
Yeah, I get more slack. Yeah, I know. I'm already taking it back. I just assume it. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic. I think it would be interesting to have this discussion with some people who disagreed with a lot of what we say. Well, I say interesting, sort of horrific. Really difficult and upsetting. So I'm aware we perhaps are kind of all coming from a similar angle, which I would like to think is just like reasonable, and perhaps that's what I will close on. I think if we're just reasonable and remember people are people, and yeah, the whole everyone should be invited to the fun thing. You know, it's games. I was talking earlier on with Lynne, and sometimes I'll say the wrong thing by saying I think everyone should sort of calm down a little bit and remember it's games. But when I say that, I mean to the really reactionary gatekeeping community. They're like, it's just a game, bro. You know what I mean? You don't. It's okay. You're not giving anything up by making it a larger playing field for people, and it's okay. It'll all be okay, I think. But I don't mean to people fighting for greater representation. They shouldn't calm down. They should continue to go really crazy. You know, it's very important. So yeah, that'll do from me.
Thanks. Anni, how about you?
I'd like to close with sort of a call for action to you all and obviously all the thousands and thousands of people who are watching this stream online.
Tens of thousands.
Because the changes around these questions, it's not just some like people on the top of the industry pyramids who can make the changes happen. That I wouldn't be working the position that where I am if I wouldn't have friends who were working alongside me within the same tier where I was, like in volunteer organizations, just asking me that, hey Anni, could you come and do us this sound effect? And I'm like, I have no idea how to do it. And they were like, it doesn't matter, just try out something. And then I found out I could do it. And I think this goes for absolutely everything within games. Same with the crediting thing that Johanna mentioned, that if you find yourself in a position, be it professionally or just like in your own tiny role-playing group or in some volunteer organization or in your online community or whatever that looks like, where you have a chance to give that chance, give that access to someone who wouldn't normally have that, and kind of encourage them to take space that is how the change happens, when thousands of people start including and encouraging women and other minorities to take space and find their voice. That's how we change things.
That's
so
really good.
Please do that when you can.
Really good call to arms. So now I have the opportunity giving the word for you guys and girls and all the other genders out there. If you have any comments at all, I will come to you with this microphone right now, actually.
We also have the thing that we
So
can
now
hear.
you have
We've
opportunity.
got the magic cube as well.
Yeah, somebody said that it doesn't work for some
Oh,
reason.
it's working last night.
It's
Is there something?
because it doesn't.
Oh,
You just go on.
Okay, I will go. So
that's a shame.
anybody, so now you have this wonderful opportunity of having all of these professionals here with you, for you, and you have opportunity of asking anything about their fields or their ideas or their experiences, and there's
Test.
Oh, it works. Does it work?
I'm a professional.
Okay,
Hi,
well,
thank
I
you very
fixed
much.
it.
My name is Maria, and I would like to hear your opinions on positive discrimination. So, the practice or policy of favoring individuals belonging to the groups that have been discriminated against previously. So, should there be positive discrimination in game industry, please?
Short answer, yes. Because we've got to widen that playing field. And women and other genders, as we've said, self-select against themselves. So we have to physically go out, or not necessarily physically, but we have to go out and encourage them and find them and bring them in. Because we know they're shy of doing it themselves. So, yeah.
For pure propaganda reasons, I would personally choose to talk of something else besides positive discrimination, even if that's what we are in practice doing. Like, for example, creating internship programs for women and minorities and whatever. I'm not opposed to calling it positive discrimination, like personally, but it seems to be an easier pitch in the professional environment if you address it from a different point of view. But again, the answer is yes, there should be.
Interestingly, someone did a study, and I can't remember the exact figures, but if they got people to submit anonymously, women were chosen more often from a field of completely anonymous pitches than if there was a male name or a female name attached to the project, at which point people would automatically start selecting male proposals as opposed to female ones.
It's an interesting thing. This is a solution I found. Actually, in the UK, you need to be careful, Lynne, because in the UK, affirmative action, which is a better term for it, is actually illegal. We can't do that. It's against the law. Basically, you cannot employ people based on the fact they're a woman to correct the balance. You're just not allowed to do it. Perhaps it's different as a business owner. I have to protect myself against that legality. However, then you just have to work around it, right? So, yeah. At the moment, I'm about to launch a sort of open call for some creative people to join our team, and I want to do it with anonymous submissions so that I just avoid it completely, you know, and then I don't run into any problems. I mean, there's a quirk of UK law. I don't necessarily agree with it, but that's the situation we have to deal with in the UK. So you have to be careful because you can run into trouble with that. But yeah, no, I don't know how else you do it really, unless we just wait and wait and wait for some sort of weird magic process to do it. I don't, you know, and yeah, making it easy for everyone, I think, is very important.
And I'd like to very quickly add that it's also, at least on the digital game side, it's a kind of a sad industry fact that there are positions where you just don't end up having super competent female candidates for those positions, and it's a very tough place for CEOs, hiring managers, whatever, to balance between gender equality and gender balance and the kind of the competence of the team. And that's why thinking about how we can start solving this problem in the earlier tiers and changing the whole culture where those positions are seen legit for women and girls when they are 15. It doesn't help if you want to hire them when they are 25, when they didn't start toiling with those things when they were in their teens.
That's good. Yeah, good angle. Anybody else?
Can I say something?
Of course. This should work. Yeah.
Is box?
Yes.
Yes.
I was kind of inspired by your story of the female player playing as this confident playboy. And I was thinking, if you were to design games from ground up to have more proactive player roles and with less reactive options, do you think it would deter those players who have grown into going for those reactive roles based on social biases, or would it encourage them? Do you think they could be designed to be inclusive while encouraging proactivity?
Yeah, I think this is a great question because this is like a real issue. Because if you make like here's a great super proactive role, but the people who would have a great time with it for cultural reasons don't pick it up, and I think that's like a thing that. But I think that's a design problem that can be. It's possible to work around with that. And one example of how to do that, I encountered. This was some time ago, but. Children's LARP is very big in Denmark, and there was a kind of an arts festival where I was helping, and they brought one of these Danish children's LARPs to Finland, and we run it here. And they had an interesting mechanic where the idea is that you had two character classes, the warrior and the mage. And the warrior had a sword, and the mage had like a bag of beans that you would throw at the enemy. And you would choose, this was the children's LARP for quite small children. But you would choose one of these. And in practice, the warrior was much more fun to do because you get to run around and beat your friends with a stick, which is obviously great. And one of the rules was that you had to pick your class in the beginning, but you could switch. And what happened was that in the beginning, it was extremely gendered. Like all the boys picked the sword and all the girls picked the beanbag. But once the LARP starts running, and then the girls kind of, they see the melee, the craziness. And then they kind of start to feel that maybe at first they throw a beanbag at some boy, and then they go, oh, that was great. I loved throwing a beanbag at this boy. But what I would like to do more is just hit them with a stick, in fact. And then they go and pick up the sword, and then they go. And I thought that's nice because it allows allows the children to kind of work through it on their own pace. And then when they are ready, they feel like, now I feel like I can do it. And then they do it. And in practice, pretty much like every wizard had become a warrior by the end of the LARP. And I think that's like one example of how to do it. But I think there are similar design solutions in different kinds of games where you can kind of build a structure that makes it easier to start, but then gives you the option to sort of start doing all the cool stuff when you're comfortable with it.
Mm. I would agree, very much so. Because the thing is, we've always got to remember that this is role-playing, but some people do find it very difficult to assume a character that is so different from themselves because they have nothing to really base it on. So it can be intimidating. So you do always have to bear that in mind. Just because your character has a really high charisma and could talk the birds out of the trees, as we say at home, doesn't mean that their player can. So you do have to be careful not to scare people off from trying something different by putting an awful lot of responsibility on their shoulders. You have to make sure that the mechanics can support them to do that if they're not confident enough to do that as themselves.
Yeah, Majesty is one of the good examples of this problem. I think in the old Vampire Masquerade, when we LARPed in the old days, Vampire the Masquerade, the Camarilla, the Majesty was, of course, kind of, if you had the Majesty, then you had this Majesty, how do you say, string or bow or this
Sash.
Red sash. And then even though you weren't this kind of a with strong character, like performing person, you were able to get this feeling of having majesty, because everybody had to bow when you come in the room or such things. But of course it takes that you have to play along with it. The others have to play along with that kind of a mechanics, and they have to understand this kind of dynamics between the characters and persons, which is not always easy. Yeah, but that's good point of view. Anybody else? Ideas, comments, questions? Yes.
Got it. So I've got this brief question about in Finland we don't use gendered nouns. We have gender neutral nouns. Everybody is just a they. So how does it from this perspective? Some game companies took a turn to switch, at least in the beginning, from what I saw, the gender neutral in early D&D stuff and such was male by default, and at some point different companies started using female nouns as sort of reaction, perhaps, or differentiation, and have there been many publications in English, for example, that are gender neutral, and how does it affect the writing and popularity?
If I may. Yeah, there's a lot of books where it's he. Then certain companies took the decision that she would be used for the GM and he would be used for the players. That's really difficult to keep track of if you're editing a book. Some companies have made a conscious decision to go with all she. I go for they. There's a huge argument in English that you can't use they as a singular. Yes, you can. We've got a whole load of historical evidence for it. And anyway, who cares? Let's just do it. So that's what we're doing now at Chaosium, is we're using they and their and them. Occasionally, if it's a specific character, obviously, who is gendered, then we will use the gender-appropriate pronouns. But mostly, we're going for total gender neutrality with they, their, and them.
That's what we did when I was overseeing that. I brought that in at Cubicle 7. We went for they. We got a few complaints from grammar pedants that were like, it's incorrect. And we were just like, oh, you just, and again, that's something I was talking about earlier, where you just got to make a decision to do it, and that's how usage changes. That's how language works. So, yeah, there's still a lot of people. Interestingly enough, I work with a few authors who are using English as a second language, and they can be very keen on he as because that's the way they've been taught, and they want to be absolutely correct, and they sort being correct is more important to them, and perhaps they don't feel empowered to just go, rules, don't care, which as a native speaker, I don't care. No respect for the English language, clearly, you've heard me speaking. They is becoming more and more common, I think.
Anybody else? Comment? Anything? You're very welcome now to give some final thoughts about the subject. You have still some continuing question.
So have you had any experiences of it affecting, has there been any study? Like I'm not sure if role-playing game companies do market studies, or how does it work? How the black box operates inside of a games company, but are there market studies about this?
No, pretty much. I think we can say no. I think most role-playing game companies are too small to do any kind of sort of credible market research. Really, the biggest piece of market research that was ever done was Wizards around 3rd edition. There are a few figures coming out of Wizards now, but no one really knows what process has been used. But there was a great big study they undertook around 3rd edition, but otherwise it's all very anecdotal, really, and it's just a sort of feel thing, I think, which obviously comes with a lot of dangers. But yeah, it's so small, really, in terms of the cost of market research, that not a lot goes on.
What I personally find interesting is that in the field of digital games, there's tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of research, and it doesn't necessarily always impact the outcome of the design. That because there's such a strong culture of certain generations of gamers who very often are the people who run these companies, seeing games with certain light, like in certain light, and seeing certain cliches and stereotypes as such an inherent part of game design that it doesn't matter how many researchers go to them and be like, no, but like seriously, look, this and this amount of our players are women and they are saying these things in masses, like literally thousands of women are saying this thing online. They don't necessarily always care. And I'm not necessarily going anywhere smart with this, but just kind of pointing out that why this is definitely a cultural problem and not a data problem. And that's why the solution should also be cultural and like community management, cultural questions, and not necessarily if we just had the data to prove that women also like gaming.
It's like with perussuomalaiset. Even though you make a lot of research, it's just research. You don't have to care about it really. Just those scientists blabbering about. And there is one more comment.
Hi, my name is Laura, and actually this is a wish. As a female player, the normal female armor is very big problem to me, and in future I would like to see more female characters that their key point is not that they are beautiful. I would like to see ugly women, which I could play. Uglier women who are pretty older, and the way that you will see that they are women is not about their appearance. That would be my wish.
Yeah, well, on that topic, there's a, forgive me, I'm going to have to be very circumspect because this is going out to a broader audience. On one particular high-profile game I worked on, we made a character, the writers made a character who was very much like you're talking about. I mean, we've done a lot of that, hopefully, that's known. But a character was made that was quite, had a sort of tough life and so on. Anyway, it doesn't really matter the details of the character. But a person in power, who was a man who had the final say on the license, saw the artwork that I had made and went, why is she so ugly? And I was like, oh, and that's a really hard question to answer sort of toe-to-toe with someone, because you can't, when they have the power to just say no, it's very difficult to go, well, that's a stupid question. Like, why is that well, because some people are, but he was very much, no, but characters in games, I mean, in line with what you've been talking about, characters in games of women should be beautiful. It's a fantasy game, so the women should be beautiful because that's fantasy, and the men are burly, and you're just like, oh God, you know, you can't instantly educate someone in the sort of previous 20 years they've missed somehow. Luckily, it wasn't changed though, because luckily, funny enough, again, to echo what you said, the team all just went, no, no, you're wrong, keep it. And he was good enough to go, oh, okay, I don't get it, I guess I'm old, which was sort of nice of him. Yeah. But it was quite remarkable to hear someone go, but no, they should have. So yeah, no, I hear you, absolutely. And I was amazed within the last sort of 10 years to have had that struggle where someone went, oh no, it should be beautiful. So why would you make an ugly woman? And you're like, oh my God.
And that's an interesting thing actually that you've just reminded me of, is you can often tell the difference between male and female writers, because quite often I'll get books into edit and I've got no idea who's written them, but there are clues. And it's usually because it's a male writer if all the women are beautiful. Women writers tend to describe more varied women. Male writers tend to go for the fantasy default of, oh, she was beautiful and tall, and, you know, no. No, let's have someone who isn't beautiful and tall. Let's have someone who's short and just normal looking, eh? That would be nice.
There was a funny one with, I'm pausing there to name the writer, a very good friend of mine, right, who is a very, very good writer. I'll tell you afterwards, I'm not telling you. And we agreed that within a particular game we would start making serious effort to include more varied women. And I got a phone call from him going, oh my God, it's like fierce and red-headed, and now I've run out, you know, and it was really good. He was being really self-aware and going, this is terrible, you know, like, I'm a really bad person. And yeah, and then you've got to make the effort to change. Because I think it's very easy for people to start to feel defensive. You know, you've got to have a certain amount of confidence to go, I am terrible at this, we need help, you know, that can be quite a big, you know, step for some people to take, which doesn't excuse it, it's just a fact. You know, some people would go, well, it's fine. Yeah, why aren't they all beautiful? They can all be beautiful because that's easy, you know. Yeah, it's a funny old world.
Yeah, I can't remember what I was reading the other day where someone said that redheads are very well represented in fantasy, actually. But it's like, no more redheads, thank you, we love you, but we've got enough.
Yeah, what's that internet thing about male writers writing women characters about she stretched boobily and
her boobs
titted down the
boobily,
stairs,
yes.
or whatever it is. Yeah,
it's wonderful.
Oh dear. Yeah.
Okay. Anything? Yeah, of course.
Okay, let's go for some homebrew publishing 101. Let's say I'm a non-binary player of role-playing games and I have a really terrific idea for an original homebrew. Okay, you could say I can crowdfund it. Tabletop crowdfunds go really, really well. But if I have a lot of weird ideas, I might not get players to test my game. I might not find that, like, word of mouth. What would you say I should do to break all those glass ceilings that are repeatedly in front of me to get that game out there?
I'm thinking, you know what
I know who I'd go to talk to, but they're not in this country. There are people out there, there are groups out there, and this is where the internet comes in really handy. You know, you can find people who would help you, who would give you the correct advice to support you to get that done. Because we have so much self-publishing, there are ways and means to get it out there. Conventions are wonderful, but for things like that, you need to be looking at the indie games market to start with, to get the good, solid advice that will help you. Because the establishment is a long way behind the indie games side of things. They're really the people who are pushing forward on a lot of representation.
Yeah, in the Finnish kind of tabletop scene, one kind of like an issue here is that we don't really, like when I said that almost like I'm sure if we have like something we could call an industry, because almost everything that gets published is published by basically somebody does it and then just pays for the print run themselves and brings it to here to Ropecon. And in one sense, there are very few barriers to doing this. You just need a year of your time and a bunch of money, and then you do it. And I say it like that, but it's like many of the people who do this might be men, but also poor as fuck. So it is difficult. And this question of like how to get people to play this and how to get play tested, like I've had these test games where I try to make some kind of an interesting art LARP for 20 people and then I get like 3 people. It's horrible. It sucks. So it's, on that sense, I'm a total downer here. But, little silver lining, because I think that we have some structures that other countries don't have, and one of these is that you can get like official arts grant money. It's very hard to get, but it's possible to do that. And just now Suomen Kulttuurirahasto, which is one of the most important funds we have, started like a special category of games to give those out. And one of the things that you can get out from there is like a grant that pays for your living expenses for a year so that you can just make art. And one of the first people who got that, I think they gave 2 or 3 of those out, was a trans woman. So it's like that gate is open. So please don't think it's closed, because it's kind of funny because this is a very conservative institution, but suddenly they are like giving these grants to Finnish trans women game designers, just not to even publish anything, but just to like work and pay the groceries. So I think it's good to be aware of those opportunities, even if they are very hard to get.
I'd like to add something which is basically about looking at creating something that is from a different perspective than the more stereotyped material that's out there. And I think in the games industry, as a bigger field, we could definitely use a perspective shift of seeing that as a resource instead of this some weird limitation where we suddenly need to change our games to include blah, blah, blah. Because the stereotyped stories of the barbarian tribe and then the knights and then the dragons and orcs and elves, they've been told again and again and again and again and again. And it's very clear that there's room for so much more. So in certain way, the kind of, I have this amazing idea for a role-playing game, from that point onward, it kind of sucks equally to everyone, because everybody in this field has good ideas, or at least they think they have good ideas. But then if your idea is actually a little bit different, and you have some muscle work behind that idea, then it's a much easier thing to get people to notice it. They don't necessarily notice the barbarians, like the Conan clone number 20,000 and something.
One more question, and then we will be thanking our...
Okay, on that comment, I really want to see the Conan clone number 23, who happens to be transgender.
So, I think it's come the time to thank our wonderful panelists here, and also you, the wonderful audience, because we had a wonderful time together, and you commented and were very attentive, and also came to sit here as I asked. So 10 points for that. So thank you, panelists. This was a wonderful discussion.